Welcome to Ildefonso Inc. I'm Spencer Alfonso.
I'm Alpha Nancy.
And today we're talking about the TVC song called Floating featuring Alpha Nancy. So I was asking you, Julia, what should we say about writing this song? And I wrote down notes. So we were thinking kind of like collaboration and then reharmonizing and telling a story with production. So I think this song was probably required the most amount of logistics. And yeah, tell me your take on it, because you noticed, you were like, you never met Cameron.
No.
Yeah, so what was that like writing without meeting the person you're writing with?
Yeah, well, I like that starting off you made it pretty open-ended. I think I'd asked you how the TVC album's coming along. You said, oh, there's this track that we haven't worked on yet. I'll send it to you. Throw spaghetti at the wall, see if anything sticks. So, just listening to it on my own, I had my own ideas for a hook and what became the hook of that song, and then bringing it in with you and then merging that with what your idea was for the song. And at the time when I wrote it, I didn't even know if floating had any material value for the song or if it was just like a placeholder name. So it was cool to come in with that and then shape the song around kind of like I think the image we settled on was kind of post-apocalyptic AI and someone just struggling for their human essence to survive.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yeah, and I totally forgot that you were the one who was like, oh, hey, I have an idea for this beat. I was like, oh, whoa, that's really cool. I wasn't even really thinking that deeply about the beat. And then I think that's maybe, did we record you before Cameron? Or
yes. Yeah, okay. We did that part. And then you looped Cameron in. So then I think the second time I came in to work on it with you, it was really neat to see how the song had taken shape and changed so drastically from just the first 30 seconds that you had given me to work off of.
That's right. Yeah. So we did basically a vocal demo, and then Cameron reacted to you, and then you reacted to Cameron.
And I remember coming in the first time and singing that melody, and then you playing around on the computer and just adding filters on my voice and kind of warping it. And I remember you saying, I want you to sound like a robot that's struggling to survive. And so I think the initial version of those vocals were even more dramatic than they are in the actual song now. But I think I kept that image with me when I listened to it.
Yeah, what was fun about your second co-write was we were able to write with an acoustic guitar, which it feels like bread and butter songwriting. And the TVC, I don't do a lot of that because it is very collaborative and it's written a lot in chunks. So being able to at least write a chorus and an outro in person in a room with someone with the guitar was really nice, because going into our next section, reharmonizing is something I really like to do, because once you have a really strong vocal melody, you can change the chords as many times as you want. And so, I don't know, when you were listening, did I change the chords? Did you notice that at all?
Yeah. And we had changed the melody too for the very end. Just trying to figure out how to make it sound like a robot a little bit. We are still alive.
Right.
And then also directing me on how to sing it, where I'm taking out more of the human parts of my voice, right, or the vibrato or those types of things that make me sound like a person.
Totally.
And trying to make it more straight and simple and just, Siri singing.
Right. Because the TVC was rooted in pop. It was when I was young, I just had one project my whole life, and it was a rock project. And I felt like I was always tempted to color outside the lines, and it was making songs worse, because it was oh, someone wants to see if I could do this thing, and this thing needs to be like this other thing. And now all of a sudden I feel like I'm wearing too many hats. So I started the TVC so I could just write with other people without much of an expectation. But now I'm okay, but I've been around doing this long enough to where I feel like I need to start honing in on what the TVC means on its own. It can't just be something that's a blank canvas. It needs to have a vibe and an energy to it. And so, yeah, I kind of landed on, we always joke, I always mention Keanu Reeves, because I'm John Wick, one of my favorite scores, Matrix, one of my favorite soundtracks. And then I just the he usually does.
Keanu wrote both of those, by the way.
Yeah. He usually does projects that are like a little bit like blockbuster, but there's some meat on the bones if you like using your imagination. It's like there's usually something minimalist about it, and there's also something like high concept.
Yeah, like there's a fairly bleak outlook on the world, but then there's a lot of imagination that's entwined with that.
Right. Yeah. Bleak is a good word. It's like making bleak fun is probably the goal of the project of like, yeah, how can we go as dark as possible and still smile when we listen to the song?
That's why you like Kurt Vonnegut.
Yes, I do love Kurt Vonnegut, and he is the king of bleak. So yeah, shattering expectations to me is like doing those things with vocalists where like I'm listening to your voice in the room in context of what we're hoping the song is going to sound like. Because as a producer, it's really hard not to like imagine in your head what's going to come out of the speakers. And then it's like you're painting. It's like you see the painting and then you go paint it. And so that happens with singers. It's like you get to hear them sing the song in the room. And then you as a producer are thinking about like, okay, how do I help them fit inside of this world and sound convincing, but also sound like themselves, but also shatter the expectations a little bit. And vibrato is always the easiest one you could pull out from a singer is like, hey, don't do vibrato. And all of a sudden they have to think about every word and where the word ends. And they can't just do their natural
like their
instinct.
own natural way of ending it. Yeah. No, it's a cool exercise for me too, because you mentioned like the novelty of writing a song on a guitar with someone in a room, and that's the only way I write songs. And so it's cool to have such a different concept to start out with, where it's like this outside idea that I have to build off from instead of just something that's coming from inside that I want to work on. And then also hearing how those ideas coalesce with other artists too. So I never worked with Cameron, and we never actually sat down together and worked on this song, but then hearing what he added and how he just enhanced that whole concept is pretty cool.
Yeah. So that kind of brings me to like the idea of when you have multiple writers, like having a shared space where we all kind of know what we're talking about. Like that I think is really valuable because having all of the imagery in our heads helps me take back the verse or say the chorus that I wrote with you and then show that to Cameron and be like, okay, so here's what me and Julia were thinking when we wrote this. And then can you add another verse that kind of like supports that, but also like do your own thing with it. And then listening to him, figuring out, okay, how do we get into the chorus section, helping him write a pre-chorus that gets us to you and then out of your section and back in. And again, that's where like the reharmonizing comes from, because it's like when you love your vocal melody and you now have the full song, like it's really fun and rewarding to go, okay, well, what if we just took out the guitars or took out the synths and just went to drums and vocals and then rewrote something to strengthen the already good idea that we have. And so that's how I always end up doing that, is I'm usually trying to make sure that the chorus feels different than the pre-chorus and the verse. But to use one of my favorite words, it's like a monolith and it needs to be glued together and like arrive at people's doorsteps and they're just staring at it as one thing. But inside of it, there's a storytelling element of like, this is the verse, this is the pre-chorus, this is the chorus. And so I think we went more minor, maybe than it was before. Like I really tried to exaggerate like minor chords in it. But yeah, let me see if there's any other notes we had. Just like telling a story with production, like as the song fleshed out, like did you feel anything different as like the production evolved from just the little demo that you heard initially to later?
Definitely. Like the beat changed, you added guitar, all of it pretty much changed. And that's something that I do admire about your style of producing, is that you're not afraid to give up a good version of something in order to find a better version of it. Whereas for me, sometimes I get really sentimental about my original way of writing something, so I don't want to rework it. But it's cool to see the opportunities that lie within one single melody. And if you're reapproaching it and giving it space and coming back to it, oftentimes you can just let it evolve into something even greater.
Yeah.
So I think that's cool. And also you were really good at including visuals. Like we would play it and then kind of put a video on YouTube for what you imagined this portraying, you know, like some sort of video game or something.
Right.
And just reminding us of like what visuals, what themes you're going off of. So I think that helps unify different brains for
Right.
one single song.
Right. You know, I'm glad you said that because that's something I'm always thinking about, which is it's more fun to write with writers who like read books and watch movies than writers who just kind of depend on their own whimsical ideas. Cause it's like, because we both share that we like Kurt Vonnegut, and then me and Cameron both share that we like the same video games, the same movies. That's where our conversation before writing happens, where I'll mention, oh, I just saw, this movie and I was thinking about this and this and this. And then Cameron will be like, oh, I just finished reading this dystopian tech book and they're talking about this and this and this. And then we kind of go, okay, in terms of the album, like how do we take some of those themes and like motifs and work them into our story? And then when I don't even really have to read all his lyrics because we've already talked about the top down. So then like he's interpreting our story one way, and then maybe I usually write like the melodic pre-choruses or choruses. So then like he hears my version on that story, and then it's something unique. But what's way harder is like when two writers come into a room with no ideas and no inspiration. They're just like, I don't know, I felt this way today, so let's write it. And it's like, okay, I didn't feel that way today. And
sure, I didn't have that personal experience.
Right. So it's like weaving our personal experiences into support like a concept or an idea. So that floating is like a really good example of that technique of like having a common language, having a common vision, and then playing inside of those lines. So that way, when we listen to it, it sounds surprising, but it also sounds like it's one idea. Yeah, that's our song breakdown of Floating. Thank you, Julia. Alpha Nancy, can people find Alpha Nancy on the internet?
Oh, they can find her. I am on Spotify, YouTube,
Sweet.
Yeah.
And you guys can find the TVC also on the internet. So we will see you guys later. Bye.
The specters dancing on